This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are talking about short stories and how they differ from the novel. So first off, they're shorter.
So this episode's only 5 minutes?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I mean, the obvious first thing to say about short stories is word count is short. You know, you're looking at, 10 to 25, well, anything above flash fiction, a few pages to maybe 30 pages. 50 pages would be a very long short story, but we aren't getting up to novella length, you know. So short, but along with the shortness comes a difference in form. It's a much more condensed type of storytelling. You aren't going to have the same level of character development. You aren't going to have a plot arc. You know, you're often looking at a slice of something. So it's focused around one character. There might be a few supporting characters, primary characters in the short story, typically a short amount of time. And we're covering one event, not a series of events that, you know, create an arc toward a climax. And the climax in the short story might be very subtle. It might just be a shift in perception that we're looking at. So the character doesn't have the same kind of arc with a revelation and becomes a better person or a worse person. It's, you know, and then the ambiguous ending, that's much more common in the short story. You don't really get those in the novel. Nobody wants to read 300 pages and then go, what?
Right?
Wait, I have to decide how it ends?
Mm-hmm.
However, if you read, sorry, I didn't mean to say however, if you read the reviews of some anthologies, short story anthologies, you'll often see reviewers say, but this one didn't really end. And I think that's one of the difficulties with a short story is that because you can have a more ambiguity because of their nature, it doesn't mean that it should just kind of stop mid-sentence. Metaphorically,
right?
You know, unless that's part of your aim, obviously, as a writer, is to just completely suspend the reader. But I think even then, the reader should know that's you know that's the part,
right? And so this makes me wonder who published those anthologies and who is reviewing them, because it's possible either the authors writing those stories didn't really understand the nature of the ambiguous ending, or they did, but the readers didn't understand the nature of an ambiguous ending, and so there's confusion there. So I want to address this, but Kathryn, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, a lot of times short stories, like the last sentence of you end the climax and you have like one sentence or two sentences. You don't have the pages or the chapter like you do in fiction. And a lot of times that'll lend itself to people thinking it hasn't ended who are used to reading longer works. If you're not used to short stories and you get that ending and you don't have basically an epilogue, you know, you don't have
a full
that
resolution
feeling of, everything's so much better now and I know my character's in a better place and this is all the stuff that's gonna, you know, no, they leave it all because you are kind of cutting it down to that bare bones of exactly what you need. And all you needed to end that story was the one extra sentence.
Right.
It's a lot hard for readers who aren't used to it.
Yeah. And in a short story, you often want the reader to walk away thinking about it long after the story ends in a very different way than in a novel. In a novel, you want the reader to be like, oh, these characters live on with me. The events were so exciting. I have to recommend it to all my friends. With a short story, it's much more of a food for thought. Like, wow, that doesn't let go of me. I've got to keep pondering it. You know, I wrote.
So, yeah. Would you say it's more thematic driven then in that way?
Yeah. It's the thing that sticks with you tends to be much more thematic. And, you know, the ambiguous ending is an unresolved question that the reader has to grapple with. So an example is my short story, The Herd, which was published in Waterstone Review, is about a bunch of people on a beach, and there's a man there who's creeping everyone out. He's watching everyone, and he follows a woman with little kids up the beach. And at the end of the short story, he's walking out into the water toward these three kids who had been playing alone or seemingly alone. They've been like off in the far corner, splashing and playing and making noise and seemingly unsupervised. But their parents are actually like kitty corner as far away as you could be and still on the beach, keeping an eye on them. So the mother sees the man going into the water, the predator getting closer and closer to the children, and she jumps up and starts cutting that diagonal toward her kids and calling to the kids and trying to intercept the man, the predator. And I wrote the story and ended it before the interception. So it's ambiguous, it's unresolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
I workshopped it. People complained about the ending. I rewrote it to show readers what happens there. I didn't like it. I went back to the ambiguous ending. I submitted it. The journal accepted it. The final editor said, so I gave her the ending that shows you what happens in the interception and the kids are safe at the end. And she said, no, it's better with the ambiguous ending. It's more powerful. Mm-hmm. Right. Because when you resolve it, it kind of puts a bow on it and you're like, yeah, of course the kids are safe. But when you don't resolve it, you're left with that dramatic tension that the whole story is about. Like, we never knew if this guy was really a predator or if he was just weird. Why was he making people uneasy? We didn't see him do anything wrong. He was just there. He was just right. But by showing the interception and the kids being safe, you just sort of deflate everything that the story is about.
Right.
So sometimes you need the ambiguous ending, and that doesn't mean it is satisfying in our traditional sense of like satisfying the reader in the, okay, here you go, it's done, but it's compelling.
Right. So that's done with skill and deliberation, and that to me would still qualify as an ending. It's
exactly.
And I was brought up on a lot of short stories, science fiction short stories specifically, and I read a ton of them, and I loved them for the fact that you'd have I think it might have been an Isaac Asimov one where. Is it called the 9 Billion Names of God, where it's this order of monks that have been tasked over the centuries with writing out all the different names of God.
Cool.
And it's predicted that when they exhaust all of the names of God, when they've written the last one, then they will the purpose of the universe will have been fulfilled. And I think the ending is, and it's stayed with me for decades. The ending is this one monk who sort of writes the final line and lays down the quill and looks out of the window, and one by one the stars are going out.
Oh.
And that's the last line.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So wow. Did they? Did God cease to? That's just amazing. Mind blowing. It's not really an ending, but it's an ending of the short story.
But and this is, I think, the difference between, for me, the biggest difference between the short story and the novel is that you probably were not following a specific monk through a specific conflict in which to find the last name of God, to write it on the, you know what I mean? Like it was much more of a feeling, a thematic, moment to get that to the reader, so that you do say, whoa, like, let's think about the purpose of the universe, and let's think about what that means for, and that's, I think for me, short stories are less about, like you said, it's not about the plot, it's not about the character development. It's about getting something to your reader in a way that they haven't thought about it before.
Right.
To make them go, whoa, or I never knew that, or maybe, I didn't like that way that made me feel, or, the tension there. It's a little more, not that novels aren't cerebral, but it's a little more of that, that anxiety
thought-provoking,
yeah, exactly,
angsty. Yeah, and I think too that story, Robert, the ending, I would say, is not ambiguous because it shows the stars going out. So it answers the question of what will happen when they get to the last name. Whereas if he wrote the last name and the story ended, then it would be ambiguous. We'd be like, did the world end? Did God die? What? But to me, the stars extinguishing
I still
that.
don't know what happened after that.
Yeah.
It still leaves a lot up
Did
in the
life
air.
cease to exist?
Right.
Yeah, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
And I think where I've certainly made this mistake in the past and not published it, but you've taken a short story in the same way that I would attack a scene.
Right.
And whilst you might say a short story is a scene of some description, as Kathryn's just articulated, it has to act as a meme that enters the reader's mind. It's not just a scene in a novel is an A to B. A short story is a different type of A to B.
Right.
That's right. It's A to Z, if you like. And and I think that's the difficulty that a lot of novelists have with short stories is they're used to taking their time. It's like preparing a 6-course meal. And so then when you come down to make a snack, I'll just make a toasty. And whilst that might be mildly satisfying for about 30 seconds, it doesn't leave you with anything. The trick is to be able to make a snack that's the most gourmet snack that you've ever come across. And I think that's the short story metaphor, is to be able to try and pack all that in. And that's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, short stories have a lot to unpack when they're well written, so they're short. And we don't get the character development, and we don't get the plot arc, and we don't get the cast of characters, and we don't get huge settings normally, but it's that thought thing, that thematic thing, where at the end you're left processing something beyond the space that contained the story.
Well, the hooks have got to be there much more evidently, not necessarily dramatic hooks, but thoughtful hooks. We were talking in a previous episode about pages of dialogue. Well, if your short story's got pages of dialogue, then that's already going to be a challenge. Just simply because everything has to be compressed, as you said before.
Yeah.
So the very nature of writing is different.
Yeah, short stories tend to be narrative driven. You have fewer characters, fewer exchanges, not none, but you need the emotional content and the world, the setting, and the backstory, and all of those pieces that are relevant to this very compact moment that is the story need to be contained in there. So you aren't going to do a ton of dialogue. You're going to give us just what's necessary for each of those components of your story.
And there's a bit about purpose there as well, because if you write, there's a difference between in the independent publishing world, there's a fair bit of marketing advice that says write a short story that you can give away, that gives a flavour of your writing, and which I subscribe to. I think is perfectly valid. That's different to the world of the art of short stories. People who write them for the art of the short story, they don't need them to lead anywhere. They're not even necessarily writing them for commercial reason. They're writing for the delight of the short story. So I think also thinking about the intent of the story too. If you are writing it for, say, commercial reasons to entice your reader into perhaps joining a series that you've written, then there's got to be some hook left open there that entices them into, well, I want to know more about this character, or I want to know where this leads to now, and that I think presents even another challenge, is to try and pack something that's satisfying within a bite-sized chunk of 3 to 5, 7,000 words, but then leaves it open to say, wow, I really like that character in that setting, I want to go read the entire series now.
Right.
Well, which is probably why most of them tend to be novellas as opposed to shorts, but still.
Yeah, and I would just caution people that a lead magnet and a short story for the sake of being a short story are are different things. Because if I sit down to write a lead magnet to bring people to my novels, I'm going to be focused on introducing them to, say, Jess and Skoghall, not on creating thematic content that's going to really, excite the intellect and emotional state of my reader. So no value judgment there. I'm just saying they're different animals, and know why you're writing short form, and then fulfill that purpose. And the literary short story or genre short story and the lead magnet, they could be one and the same, but I wouldn't expect them to be.
Right. I think that's why a lot of short story anthologies are usually built around a theme. You see, that's what's really important there. They're not talking about, let's build a short story anthology around, I don't know, like kick butt female protagonists. No, you're going to build it around something more thematic than that character type. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Yeah, and this is what I'm saying about, if you're writing something, as you say, as a lead magnet, then there's more of an art to that than simply writing it as if you would write a scene from a long form novel.
Taking a scene out and calling it a short story. No.
Yeah, and that's an easy trap to fall into because it's our habit as novelists, perhaps, and B, you think, well, this is all designed to intrigue them about the characters, etc., etc. Whereas I think it's actually helpful to review what you guys have just said, which is, make it a mind bomb, a depth charge into your head and kind of explodes a bit. If you can do that and it's a lead magnet as well, then whoa, we're talking some seriously great writing craft, I think.
Right. Yeah, and if it doesn't stand alone, then it's not a short story, it's an excerpt. So if you want to pull something out of your novel and use it as a lead magnet, just title it an excerpt. That's allowed.
I think we talked a lot about the theme being so important, but I think sometimes that can be really intimidating. Like, I know that has intimidated me from starting short stories or trying to write them, because I start thinking, it's got to be so incredibly meaningful and exactly. And then you just don't start. But I think you can get ideas for short stories the same way you can get ideas for novels. You just have to explore it in a different way. And a lot of times writing instructors will say short story is the anvil in which you hammer your craft, and then you can write novels once you
wait, I need to write that down for my students. Short stories are the anvil.
Well, you can be touting the same thing that my professors did.
Who do
at
I
college.
cite? Yeah.
I've heard it so many times, but I just think sometimes that's true. You can really hammer things out in short stories that then you can take craft-wise into your works. And sometimes it can be counterproductive because of the differences that they do have. So don't get caught in that trap where you're like, I haven't written 700 short stories, so therefore I can't write a novel, or vice versa.
Yeah.
I'm a novel writer, so I can't write short stories. That's not just different animals sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't think you can learn novel writing by writing short stories or vice versa. But someone who I mentor a writer who came to me with this novel project, and, we got, I don't know, halfway through the book or whatever. And as writers, we tend to have the same problems consistently. And finally I said to him, let's shelve this and work on short stories for a while, because I wanted him to shift his brain to a different world and a different set of characters and allow himself the freedom, because novels can take years to write, and this had been something he'd been working on and processing and developing for years, whether just in his head or on the page. And so to pause that and focus on short stories, then instead of always trying to perfect one setting, he could jump around to 50 different settings, over the course of months of writing short stories. And he could go into umpteen different protagonists. And so there's a huge benefit of writing short. And, let's say you have a block to short stories. You hate them, you don't read them, you don't want to write them. scenes. Just write 50 different scenes. You can go to the practice the world building, practice the dialogue, practice the different POVs, and not sort of chain yourself to the one project that you've been working on. So that, we'll just say, writing short is the anvil upon which craft is pounded out.
You hammer your craft. Okay, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, well, also I think you bring up a really important point here, is that writing a novel can be an extremely lengthy and isolated process.
Yeah.
And the feedback loop is equally lengthy, because it's still then got to go through editors or whatever process you use.
Yeah.
And the shorter the feedback loop, the faster you can improve your craft.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So there's definitely a lot to be said for the practice of writing shorts. I don't particularly like writing them, but the challenge has been instructive, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think if you are in a writing group, especially, it's really helpful to write short. It's tempting to write your novel chapter by chapter and have them read it. It's better for you as a writer in terms of your craft to write lots of short stories and get their feedback on them, because then, like you said, Alida, you're making the same mistakes. Sometimes you can start seeing, second story, that mistake that they pointed out, I can fix, and then new mistakes will start popping up rather than having the same mistake in one big huge manuscript. So
definitely. And I'll just say my mentee did come back to writing his novel a much stronger writer. It was pretty remarkable, the changes, the growth he went through. And I think shifting gears and practicing lots of different things and not being tied to one world and one point of view or whatever was really instructive. Other thoughts on short stories, or shall we wrap this one up?
We went as long as normal.
Wait, let me check the clock.
The short stories episode. No, just kidding.
Wait, yeah. Well, we went past our 5 minutes, Robert.
Okay. But is it a satisfactory ending?
No,
Only
it's an
you,
ambiguous
the listener,
ending.
can tell us.
We have to leave people scratching their heads going, boy, now I have to think about that for days on end.
I think final thoughts for short stories is if you're finding yourself short on time, short on motivation, short on just things going on in your brain with your novel project or whatever, that's a good time to take a break, like you said, and do something short, finish something, get excited again, work on something in your craft that you really want to work on, and that's the way to do it.
Absolutely. And also
are you going?
I was going to say, also, when you feel stuck or like you're burning out on a long form project, take a break, do a bunch of short stuff, have fun, go to totally different worlds.
Or even go and read some. I mean, there's some amazing. Is it the 6 word short story competition that floats around?
Yep.
And they're fun.
Eye rolls, whatever.
There are also lots of very good short story podcasts that you can listen to. If you're listening to podcasts, there's some great ones out there that are curated very, very well edited, the whole thing, so you can get a really good idea of genre short fiction or more literary short fiction and really dive in.
Or just go to your library and pick up some anthologies.
Do it.
As well. And we will link to our ages ago short story episode where we found short stories online, linked to them so you can read them before, during, or after listening to our discussion. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.
That short story episode should come with a warning. Warning, Alida's story kills puppies.
Oh, that's right.
Because I got to that part in that short story and had a conniption fit.